We've been on the series. If you're brand new to the series, it's our third week out of 6. We do these a couple of times a year. We gather a big group together. Usually in between the series, we have some groups that get together, and we kind of play that out for a while, and then we come back and do another series. So thank you guys for coming to this one. We're on a series. We try to be creative and some idea of relevancy to who you are at your stage of life. And I try to bring good stuff to you that, as Tommy says, will give you a bit of a challenge and some introduction to the bigger questions of life, I think, that every man must begin to answer. So this series is about every man has a story. And I like this because it involves you. You have a story. The byline of this one was creating a story that makes a difference. So here's the deal. If you have a story, will your story be a good one? And if you were here the first week, we put out the notes from the first week, and because we didn't have pens for you, we filled in the blanks, and that's the outline for the first week. But we talked about the idea that every man's got a story. Will yours be a good one? Because lots of men have bad stories. And not only bad stories, but mediocre stories. If you were here, I'm certainly not going to replay all of that. But I want you to know that there are 4 big elements in good story. And so what I did was, I said, wouldn't it be great for the guys to hear from 4 men, 4 accomplished men, 4 successful men? Because it's always great to see models of people who have gone before you and have done it well. But accomplished men do not necessarily make a good story. There are a lot of good guys who have done extremely well in life who have a bad story. And so we looked through 4 elements of what makes great story. Again, I'm not going to rehearse this for you because I don't want to take up our guest time. But simply, it talks about character. What's the character of the man? You've got to have a good protagonist. We talked about this idea of ambition. A good protagonist has got to have an ambition. So the question is not simply what are you striving for, but is what you're striving for, does it matter? Maybe you're after the wrong things. And so we talked about that. And then we talked about the fact that great conflict and great risk make for a great story. And if you don't have great conflict in your life, things that have happened to you, not necessarily in your control, maybe out of your control, but even things that you have created, done to yourself by your choices, even then, you can still have a great story. Bad choices don't make for a bad story. So that's why, isn't it a great thing to know that there's always a sense that you can overcome things that have happened to you. We talked about that idea, the conflict and the risk. And then we talked about the fact that, are you moving towards some resolve? In other words, that's what do you do with the conflict that comes to your life. And so I thought, let's bring up some guys that have had who have great story, who have these 4 elements in their life. And so I'm delighted to bring up a dear friend of mine. Some of you know him. He's been around us and in here before. As a matter of fact, he was with us at the last series. He came up and was on a panel with us about the whole issue of money. And so I want to bring him up. Some of you know him, but let's bring him up anyway, and I'll introduce him. Bob Brune. Let's bring him up. You hear okay? Yeah, why don't we do this? Let's scoot up here a little closer to each other. I mean to them. I'm sorry. Bob and our dear friends. Bob, how long do you think we've known each other? I was trying to think this morning.
Gosh,
how long?
Maybe 1977. Joel used to be a Young Life leader. Did y'all know that? You know what Young Life is?
Were you in my Young Life Club? I forgot.
No, we used to, when I was playing with the Cowboys, you'd have me come over and speak to your,
oh yeah,
like you had 4 or 5 high schools pulled together and come out there and
you do your thing on your.
Yeah, I don't know. It was.
We've done a lot of stuff together. Bob and I have really grown up our children together, our families together. We've laughed together. We've cried together. We're dearest of friends, and I'm just delighted that he could come and tell you the story. An accomplished man for sure. Some of you, it's funny, I had Roger Staubach speak one time for a group of high school students, and when he stood up, seriously, this was like 1988, and he had retired in 79. And the high school kids were like 8 or 9 when he was playing. And And so I had him speak, and he came, and I introduced Roger, 2,000 kids there, and it was like this mediocre, like, who is this guy? And it's funny, isn't it, Bob, famous fleeting? Some of you might not know that Bob is an accomplished athlete. If you didn't know, some of us, there are a few of us that have risen to the levels that Bob and I have in our athletic careers. And so, Bob was an all-state wrestler. He won't tell you that, but he was an all-state wrestler, heavyweight.
Yeah.
Yeah, just want to confirm it. He was All-American linebacker at Arizona State a couple years. He went on to be drafted in the third round with the Cowboys, that dirty dozen they had in 1975, went on to win the Super Bowl next year. He has 2 Super Bowl rings. He doesn't show them, he doesn't wear it.
3 rings.
Like I said, don't let me miss any of your accomplishments, all right? I just don't want to miss any of them.
I don't want to miss that one. Super Bowl.
Okay, he has 3 rings. And I was getting ready to say you don't talk about them or ever show them, but obviously you do a lot of that, sounds like to me. Oh, that's funny as heck. Okay, I might miss this one too. 4-time Pro Bowl.
3.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Someone knows the other one, right?
Okay, so a long and storied career, I think 11 years.
10.
This is all from my memory.
I sent him a bio when he will read it.
Okay. All right, so we're close. We're in the ballpark. And the point is, he spent a lot of his athletic career.
We're good buddies, though. We
spent a lot of time together. All right, so look, here's the deal. I will throw this out. He was the Dick Butkus Award winner for his senior year at Arizona State. If you don't know what that is, the outstanding middle linebacker, or linebacker, I guess, or middle linebacker, tell me, to linebacker for college football. Let's don't get too detailed there. And what we don't know, the final result of is, and this is a big honor, he's been, by the way, he's in the Hall of Fame for Arizona State athletics, and he's up for the Collegiate Hall of Fame 2013. So we're really hopeful, because I told him if he gets it, I'm going for the ceremony with him.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, you can come with me then, all right? And I'll introduce you. How about that? We'll have you the greatest thing ever happening.
Awesome.
But Bob is accomplished. But as I told you before, to me, you know, look, a lot of you guys are accomplished. You're smart and bright. You're going to do big things. And to me, it's the accomplishment of life is just. It's wonderful, and I'm proud of Bob. All of us are proud of Bob. I can sit and listen to his stories for a long time. They're just fun to listen to. And we revel for his successes. But it's not simply that makes a good story. And that's what I want you guys to see. I don't not necessarily wanting you to say, well, gosh, I'll never be Bob, or I'll never be you. You know what I mean? You are you. And I want you to be you. And I want you to have your story. You might never be in the Collegiate Hall of Fame. That's a great honor, but it's maybe not your honor. So I want to get into Bob's life a little bit and have him unpack it so that we can kind of get to know him below the waterline. You know, heroes are made from a distance, but impact is made close up. And I remember as I got to know Bob, you know, he's a middle linebacker for the Cowboys. I'm just a young life guy, you know. And it was just fun to be around him, because it reminded me of high school, being around the studs, you know, that you could kind of hang with, because I wasn't one of those either. And it was just fun to be back in that world again. But Bob was in his own thing. He was on TV on Sundays. And it took me a while to get to know the inside of Bob, to become his friend, to see that there's a bigger man in there than just a football player. Because for one thing, fame is fleeting. That's why some of you probably didn't even know he played. Now, I've spent a long time introducing you, Bob, and I'll let you take the rest of it. But I'll just ask you a few questions, all right?
Yep.
And you can kind of go through this with you. But tell us a little about your background, your family, all right? Where you grew up and what your family's like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was born in Los Angeles, and my dad got a job transfer, so we moved to Phoenix, Arizona. And he came from a big Catholic family. 3 kids in my family. We moved. I was 6 years old. We got to Phoenix and settled there. And my dad was in the tire business. Ultimately, owned his own General Tire company. He started out as a changing tires, in the Navy, GED, but he was a climber. And by the time he passed away, he had built a nice business and made some good money and that sort of thing. So, we had that in our system. I think my own home, I would say that my mom and dad gave me a lot of affirmation and affection and attention. So I don't feel any deficits with that. I know a lot of guys do. But the thing that maybe most characterized, we'll get into some more of this in a minute, but my mom and dad got divorced when I was like 9 or 10. And I remember that being very painful. And, standing at your, some of you, I'm sure, come from divorced homes. And you know what I'm talking about, but standing, looking out my shutters and seeing my dad drive away. And it just killed me. It was one of those deep, deep hurts. But, the cool part of this story, you don't hear this very often, is my dad we moved back to Los Angeles. My mother took us back after we were divorced. And he would come over and visit us once in a while. On this one occasion, like after a year or so, he came, my mom and dad stayed out all night. And he came back the next day. I mean, I get chills just talking about it. He walked in, he says, "Come on, kids, pack them up. We're going home." I mean, you could have given me $1 million, and I wouldn't have been happier to hear that. Because we went back to the home that we had gotten established in while I was in grade school and all that. So, plus you just don't know the trajectory that would have happened to, in those days, that was the 60s, and so, all the drugs and all the stuff was happening. Southern California was a bastion for that. So you don't know, what would have happened had he not come back and gotten us kids and gotten us back on some kind of track. And so yeah, it was good thing.
Okay, and I know your mom comes from a particularly difficult background. I know. So do you want to talk about that? Does that have any intrigue into the kind of how faith kind of blended into your family, all your mom's history?
Yeah, some. I think if you look upstream, I think one of the things after I became a Christian, Joel, which I've mentioned to you before, is that when you look upstream, you don't see some of those, you don't see any of those faith lines coming from my mother's family or my dad's family, except for my grandmother was a devout Catholic. But, the kids weren't really into it. My grandfather would tell everybody to go to church, that kind of thing. So I hadn't seen any of that. But in college, I became a Christian my senior year in college. And so I began thinking about what that meant for family lines. Got married, started having my own kids, and how is it that I was going to establish some sort of generational, change?
Okay, so but growing up, you had did you actually go to mass and these kinds of things?
No, I mean occasionally with my grandparents.
Okay, so it's just kind of a non-issue in your home.
Yeah, just not.
Okay, so somewhere in your, I know we're jumping right into this spiritual thing quickly because I want to bleed that into your life a little bit,
yeah.
But let's back it up a second. How did you get involved with sports? Were you just genetically wired that way or what?
Yeah, my brother played football, and we were always out on the playground. You know how it is. You guys all did that. And, a lot of people ask me, man, when you were a little kid, you just, really want to be a pro football player? And actually not. I mean, football kind of evolved. I was a big kid, and, I could kind of bully my way around on the soccer field and sports and basketball and so forth. But when I got into high school, it became apparent that, hey, I was actually pretty good at this. I mean, I was the same size in high school as I was with the Dallas Cowboys. I was 6'1", 220-something pounds, and I could run a 4.6. I actually could run, not a 4.5 breed, but I could run a 4.6 for a while, 4.7 consistently. So I was fast enough, and I was big enough, and so as those years unfolded, it became obvious that I was going to be able to do this. And then, then all of a sudden the college recruiters started coming, and so I was recruited all over the nation, and then I got to Arizona State, and that worked out. And pretty soon the pro football scouts were coming, and before you knew it, I was playing pro football. What
kind of guy were you in high school? I mean, would you say you're a likable guy? People like you? Were you kind of like
social?
cocky?
I mean, a lot of we had a big social high school, a lot of stuff going on. But the thing that I'll look back on, and it's a little out of order, but the same thing. We're good. Is those years between 13 and 21, Man, I've got some regretful experiences there because I was just wild as hell. Man, I put the pedal to the metal on the football field and social life, and if we get away with it, we'd do it. It's amazing maybe that I'm not in jail, for some of the things we did. But we just, I just didn't have a lot of...
You want to tell us any of those?
Yeah, use your imagination.
All right.
Maybe I've overstated that a little bit, but not too far off. But, when you're kind of rolling and things are good and, you're the All-American and you got buddies that are along with you, you just, bunch of rogues, and pretty soon. And while my parents gave me, I think, a loving, safe, good home, maybe they didn't have the values to instill in me or a father to kind of step into my life and say, you know what, it's time to kind of get back in the middle of the fairway.
So look, you're highly accomplished, you got lots of attentions, Pro Scouts are coming your way, you're graduating from college, right? Mm-hmm. And so somehow something is not lining up for you in terms of your projection.
Yeah, they say that, G.K. Chesterton's got that great quote, a man walking into a brothel is really looking for God. So in a lot of ways, all of that pursuing, wine, women, and song was just looking for an emptiness, filling a void. I mean, who is it that said, every man within his soul has got a God-shaped vacuum. You can't fit it with anything but God. You'll try. You can try to fit it with money, with sex, with power, with influence, with popularity, with fame, whatever, but it just won't fit. So I think I got to a point in my senior year in college, and I really do say this ever so humbly. I mean, it was All-American, it was MVP, it was a bucket, all these things were coming, and yet I felt very empty at that time. Although I'd had these accomplishments, I was getting my business degree, and from the Harvard of the West, Arizona State University. There was a lot, it was almost kind of conflictual, but thankfully, really some really, really great people had entered our life. I was dating Mary in those days, and they were from Los Angeles, done well, they were Jewish, they become Christians at age 42, believe it or not, and we're on fire about that. And their daughter was one of Mary's good friends, and so they'd come to campus often and talk to us about faith, and it was really intriguing. So I kind of dug in and started investigating.
I'll be darned. Yeah. And you had a collegiate professor that was kind of key in that too, didn't you?
That too. I mean, you say, hey, by chance, but there's some divine providence there. There was a class that had kind of gone, you know about these classes that you can get the words out and get an easy A, And so took this class, and his name was Bill Baruti. It was called Biblical Backgrounds for Literature, and I was not a literature guy, but man, I was just fascinated with the way he worked through, the Shelley and Keats, and I'm trying to think, maybe some literature guys, but anyway, how the Bible influenced all their thinking. And the class was packed. I mean, you couldn't get another person in the class because he's such a popular professor.
Easy A's too, right?
Yeah. But it turned out he was really an outstanding guy, and talked about faith and the way it affected life and thinking through the ages and that sort of thing, so it was kind of cool.
Okay, so Bob, somewhere in there you had, I think you were driving along in a truck and you pulled up in front of the stadium or something, and you said yes to wanting to say yes to Jesus or something like that.
I would say, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I've been through Young Life, and I'd heard it, because I had friends that were Christians, I don't want to over-dramatize it, but I just had enough. And God was, I think I'll go to my grave, there's a lot of debate over free will and predestination sort of thing, but somehow God just kept gnawing at me, and I wasn't really looking for him, but he just kept gnawing away because there was an emptiness inside. And it was just literally one day driving down the street in front of the stadium, it's symbolic, but I just said, man, I've had enough, Lord. I don't know what it means exactly, but I'm turning it over, and it's kind of I gotta give it, but it was God asking really for my will. They say there's three things, right, to keep you from moving towards God. and Joel espouses this in the search ministry, but emotional issues, I've seen what those Christians do. I don't want to be one of those guys who don't water ski on Sunday, they don't drink, smoke, and chew. You know, all those kind of things that you can sort of conjure up and say those Christians are just that way. That's the emotional response, right? Mm. And then there's an intellectual evaluation of what it means. I mean, you know, the truth of the universe. You really go investigate that fully. And I don't know that any of us, short of guys with some triple PhDs, but even they can't get to the end of it, can they? Mm-hmm. So there's an intellectual pursuit on who God actually is and what it actually means to believe in a God of the universe who's got a certain set of requirements and expectations and an idea of what he intended for life to be. I mean, there's a real deep, long intellectual, you can't get to the end of it. And then the third part is that your will. I mean, there's just a part of us that just doesn't want to turn our lives into subjection to something that's unseen, even though we can kind of intellectually go through and say, hey, this is a truthful set of evidences. So I think it was wrestling with all those classic things that men wrestle with, and I did.
Okay, so you made some decision. You kind of get your toe in the water. You come to the Cowboys. Mm-hmm. You're on a spectacular team that win the Super Bowl your rookie year, right?
Yep.
And
well, we lost the Super Bowl.
Okay, so the next year
we went to the Super Bowl.
You went to the Super Bowl your rookie year, and then won the next year.
Yeah, well, I mean,
you won 3 of them.
I'll take it from here. Okay. No, thank you for the intro.
Yeah.
I'll just tie that into what was happening in college. You know, when you just became a believer and, you know, didn't know quite what to do with that, wasn't really broadcasting it. But then I was drafted by the Cowboys, who it turns out had a head coach by the name of Tom Landry. You guys are probably too young to remember him. But this guy was a total stud of studs of coaches in the NFL. Great, great man. But he's also a Christian man, and an outspoken Christian man at that. So 150 rookies come into the first mini camp for the Cowboys in 1975. And it's typical for only 5 or 6 rookies to make the team. So you're sitting there with 150 guys, and you know only 5 or 6 guys are going to make the team. So Coach Landry walks into the room, and I'll never forget this. He says, well, I'll tell you here, the way I run my life, and he wrote these on the board. He says, first we have my faith, and then I have my family, and then we focus on football. Everybody got that? Yeah, I guess we do. So that was his order of life. It was really cool. And then he said the next thing that I want to tell you is that, guys, there's 150 men in this room, and most of you will not make this team. But I'll tell you, make it your goal to make this team. That's what I'd like to, what you should be thinking. So the second thing is if you've made the team, become a starter. And the next thing he says, once you become a starter, distinguish yourself in the league. That's how you'll help the Dallas Cowboys. So those are some cool little nuggets. We can talk about those some more in a minute or two. But he just had so much integrity and leadership and incredible just presence of his faith and his focus and how he did his life. And it was a perfect fit to come into that and just become a Christian and sit at the knee of a Christian man. And there were other Christian things going on around the team too, which were very accommodating. It's as if God plucked me up of Phoenix, Arizona, and sent me down to Dallas, Texas, and says, here's an environment by which you can prosper with me.
And Bob, somewhere in there, you won a Super Bowl or 2 or 3.
Yep.
And my curiosity is, first of all, what's it like to win a Super Bowl? And secondly, tell us where you found yourself, not only athletically, but personally or in business, family, anything that you want to bring up here, in some kind of confusion or discouragement or pain or uncertainties or loss, these kinds of things. It could be football related, like what's next after a Super Bowl. I don't know. I mean, I'm just asking you. First of all, what's it like to win a Super Bowl? I mean, how do you feel when the clock does a zero on your
Well, I'll tell you guys, and a lot of you played sports, but man, when it's a day or two before the Super Bowl, I mean, you're ready to die for the cause, because you know you're 27 years old, man, and you're there. I mean, it's going to happen. You're actually going to play in the Super Bowl. So, in fact, they've done those studies about what would you do for a gold medal, and most of the response, I'd die for a gold medal. I mean, those Olympians. And that same syndrome exists in pro football and probably other pro sports too. But no, I mean, it was, I feel so fortunate in my 10-year career. I think we caught the best years of Coach Landry's coaching career. He'd already been coaching for the Cowboys for 15 years. In those 10 years, that Dirty Dozen rookie group of 12 of us made the team, had his best years. 3 Super Bowls in the first 4 years, 6 NFC championships in 10 years. Get to sit at his knee, get his leadership, so forth. But so that was a good run. But towards the end, and there's this old saying, nobody gets out of pro sports alive. You know, you're going to get some criticism somewhere along the way. And in my last year with the Cowboys, I was about 30, 31-ish. You know, the critics started coming out, and the writers, all those guys have been your buddy, writing good things about you. Now they're starting to criticize you. And there was another guy coming, Gene Lockhart, who was a big guy, and everybody, the league was getting bigger and bigger. Everybody wanted big people, not the fast and quick, but the bigger. And I could play today, though. I've gained 40 pounds.
Yeah, half that.
But no, and so, man, I can remember all that criticism coming, and it just wasn't any fun. And so it was almost, it had this Cinderella kind of run, you know, and with all my buddies, but then there were some things that were starting to occur to me that life is real. I mean, it really is. Then the other thing is when you retire from pro football, all of your peers, like you guys look around, you're busting it. You're putting in your time. I've met with a lot of you guys. You are in real estate or some kind of business, and you're learning, you're growing, you're pushing, you're grinding every day. And so you do that for 10 years, but I'm playing football for 10 years, so you come out of that environment and you look around and you really don't have an identity. You don't have anything to do. Now, thankfully, I'd started in the real estate business, so I got a little head start on that. But there's a real issue with that for these guys that come out. Even the guys that come out with $100 million, you wouldn't think it, but they're just 30, and they just don't have anything to do, and they're not playing anymore. And they got a lot of money, but what do they do?
What are the stats on that, Bob? Like,
I don't know, but it's big.
how many guys come out bankrupt or something, or go bankrupt?
Yeah, that too. I mean, then guys mishandle their money. It'd be hard to believe you could generate $100 million. So that's one of the challenges, Joel. And also, I was in real estate. I acquired some real estate. I started this company, a development company. And within 3 or 4 years of retirement, the biggest real estate crash in the history of the world occurred in the late 80s. I mean, it was just $1 worth of real estate went to 25 cents. And we had a lot of it. And we had a lot of debt. I've told some of you guys this before. So that came crushing in. And I'll tell you, by the time I was 37, 38 years old, I had 4 kids, a good marriage, and but man, I was just beat up, and to a point that I'd had like maybe a burnout. I mean, to the point where I couldn't even go and conduct conversation in a meeting. I mean, I'd just gotten that sort of unstable, just because I owed millions of bucks. You know, I was working 13, 14 hours a day to keep all this going. I built this, you know, by that time we had about 50 employees. You know, it was just a lot. So for whatever reason, but I'll tell you, in my own experience, I see that now, and you know, you're thankful for those times when you're looking back at them. When you're in the middle of them, they are no fun. But God was such a very present help. There's a verse of scripture, it's in the Psalm somewhere, maybe 46. Says he's a very present help. And I know I probably should have gotten some counseling or something, really. But I didn't. I just kept fighting through it.
Bob, we met a lot. The two of us met.
Yeah, a little bit.
I was trying to suggest I gave him counsel, but he didn't pick up on it.
He gave me some. He's always a good friend. But, you know, I remember I probably read through the Proverbs 100 times. And those things are like an old friend, because they gave me encouragement, they gave me focus, they gave me the ability to keep going. All these principles of life that I just really hadn't yet discovered. So, you know, I look back at some really good times to have grown up, and not only gotten serious with my faith instead of just kind of messing with it, going to church, yeah, hey, that's a good thing, but really taking God seriously and taking my own faith walk seriously.
And the journey to take God seriously, I think I turned myself off. The journey to take God seriously was a process, was a journey. And fellas, I know you know this, but that's generally how that happens. It's a process. So when you see Bob talking about how faith engaged him, it started at a very basic level for sure, and progressed up through those challenges, as you know. And that's a lot of effort, counsel, study, involvement, engagement, and so forth. So take part in that. Bob, we got about 3 minutes left.
Okay.
So is there anything that's just, you're saying, oh, I really want to tell these young guys this?
Yeah,
Your story, faith, challenges, anything.
you know, you asked some of these questions in here, and yeah, I think there are 2 or 3 things that I thought you asked. What are the 3 things? And I thought the first thing is, without a faith in Christ, life makes no sense. It doesn't. You can chase hard, you can run hard, and I've seen it, man. You look at the 1977 championship team, Super Bowl championship, 53 guys on the team, and 4 of them are dead. 20 of them have had some really, really serious dependency problems, trouble, this kind of thing. And then you look at the guys that had moved off on their trajectory, having put their faith in Christ, and their lives have got some sort of meaning to them, and they had impact. So, I mean, just to use that as an example, without a faith, guys, I'm just telling you, it's hard as hell out that door. It really is. Life is hard. When Adam got thrown out of the garden, and God said, you're going to toil by the sweat of your brow. And stuff is going to happen. People are going to get sick. You're going to lose money. There's going to be trouble. And I don't mean this in a pessimistic sense. Under the best of conditions that man can conjure up. Or you're going to get really rich, and that's going to be a mess too. So unless you've got some kind of pathway and some kind of value system which you can ascribe to, and I would maintain it's the God of Christ, right? That it's going to be a mess. It just is. And someday, when you're on your deathbed, and it won't be long for all of us, you look back and wonder about all that. But I just really encourage you, if you're not considering now, do so. The other thing I thought that would make sense is, guys, be a net contributor in your walking and going and coming. I was talking to Tommy earlier about some business situations he's got, some transitions and so forth. You know, having an integrated life and a life of integrity as you transition and move through life, well, the only way you're going to do it is if you've got an authentic faith in Christ. But to aspire to that, leave a trail behind you that is a net contribution of good, and don't be afraid to give yourself away and give to others. I'm not talking about being a wet noodle, but I am talking about having a sense of integrity. There's a scripture in the Old Testament that says, do not cut the corners. In other words, of your fields. Leave some for those who are in need. Meaning, don't try to take every single little piece of everything. I mean, be generous and be kind, and allow for margin to happen in your life along the way. So be a net contributor. So, I don't know, there's a lot of things to say, Joe. Yeah. You asked, what's the most courageous thing I've ever done? I don't know. I've never jumped in a river and saved anybody. I just haven't. But, or I've never jumped on a hand grenade, but maybe you've got some guys that are going to come in and talk about doing that. But I think the courageous guy in our society is the guy that's exchanged the Ferrari for the minivan. You know, the dad. I mean, in all of us, isn't it? Aren't we anxious to go, do our deal? The 2 things that are our enemies are shame and selfishness, constantly. Got the shame meter going because we don't think we're good enough, but we're constantly selfishly pursuing things that we'd like to have. But the stud to me, over the long haul, is the guy that's exchanged that Ferrari for the minivan. And he's willing to give up his Saturdays to work for the widow across the street. He's got it, you know, he gives up his nice suit of clothes. He defers, he buys a suit every 5 years instead of every year. And gives up all of his selfish interests for his children, his family, devotes himself, stays married, even though the wife is not as pretty as she used to be. We're not that good looking as we used to be either. So the guy that stays home, stays put, stays focused, committed to his family, committed to his God over the long haul, that's the courageous man. I mean, that's not easy, you guys. That's not. That's the hardest course, actually. Because the guys that are jumping off the ship these days are running off to the blonde and the Ferrari in their minds. They're running to the brothels. And, but the courageous thing to do is to stay put and begin to turn into and seek out what God has in mind for you to go do. There's a verse of scripture, Ephesians 2:10 says, go and walk in the works that God has prepared for you beforehand. In other words, go find out who you are and go do it. And be content with that. And instead of kind of looking over what's that guy doing, find out who you are and what it is you're supposed to go do. And those are Joel's two great questions. Who am I and what am I supposed to do? And guys, there's answers for that. That's the cool thing. There are answers.
Hey,
And a lot of them are here. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much for being part.
Yep.
You give a great perspective, I think, on a man who has accomplished a lot, as we said earlier, and who's learned to integrate a bigger idea into his life. The idea that there's something bigger than us worth fighting for. And I think this is the whole idea that Bob was sharing about this faith journey. And one of the reasons that we do what we do here is to encourage men like you to keep considering, kicking the tire, keep working at it, because it is a process. And that's why I show up to do this with you guys, why I love you, why I want to keep encouraging you along your way, why I want to break meals with you, I want to have coffee with you, so I'm accessible. If you'll just contact me, we'll get ourselves together. And Bob, you couldn't have said it more articulately. Thank you for, again, for your presence and being with us. So I'm just going to pray and send you off. And you guys can come up and say hello to Bob and thank him as you wish. All right? Remember James and John, if you're in the room, come say hello to them. Hey, Lord, thanks for a good morning. Thanks for another day that we have life, that we can consider what's good and true and beautiful today. Thank you for these men who've gotten up early. It's difficult. Life is difficult, as Bob said, but even then, to get up an hour worth of rest is important. And so thank you for these men. I pray you would encourage them today because they got to hear a man's fresh perspective who's labored hard and worked well and loved well. And I pray that you will use Bob's encouragements today in all our lives. Hear these men as they go from here, help them be the kind of men that you've created them to be. And I do pray for that in the name of Jesus. Amen. Hey, we'll see you guys next week. And by the way, before we leave, next week, if you can put together Harvard, Fallujah, and Bronze Star. That's our guest next week.
All right, hey guys, and hold on one second. You guys, I didn't mention these, I brought them. These two books, this is called Fathered by God by John Elridge. Anybody read it in the room? This is, what this book lines out is the stages of life. When you're in your boyhood, you know, say up to age 12, and then from 12 to 21, he calls you a cowboy. That's when testing and adventure. That's when you do your road trips, but they don't really count, you know. And then it talks about becoming a warrior. So in your 20s, 30s, 40s, maybe in your 50s, you're a warrior, and you're a lover during those days. And then later on in your life, maybe you get to be a sage and maybe a king. So he talks, this is a really cool book. And this one, I recommend every one of you read this. And it's, you know, it's quick and dirty. And this one is called Stepping Up by Dennis Rainey. I don't know, have you seen this? You know about it. It's finally out. They've been threatening to get it out, but really it's the same concept, just different words, a little bit different twist here and there, but it's called Stepping Up. So guys, if there was a book I could recommend, these two would be it, particularly this Fathered by God, because I'm familiar with it. But if you're interested in that, you know, I'm going to let you guys go, but there's a proverb that says, a man's appetite works for him. You guys have to look to the future and look at stuff out there that you want to go do. And so if that stirs you, if you see something, you go, yeah, you know, and if that stirs you, that's a proclivity God's put in your heart and your mind. Go do it. Go find out about it. But this book deals with all that.